Well, let's talk about a horror movie that's more about what you hear than what you see with the review of Undertone. Let's get into it. What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Welcome back into JC's Movies, where you can see all kind of movie and TV show content with me, JC, especially within the superhero, comedy, and horror genres. We'll be talking today with the review of Undertone. But if those are up your alley, be sure you subscribe here to the channel where we're talking about those genres a lot. We can chat some movies together. Plus, I'm bringing movie news updates every Monday through Friday here on the channel with the Movie News Daily Show. So your subscription helps out. And you can also help out just hitting that like button, giving this video a chance to hit that YouTube algorithm and find other movie fans like you and me. With that out of the way, let's get set. We're going to talk a little bit about Undertone. Of course, we'll be diving into spoilers momentarily, but before we do, we'll get into some just kind of brief overview. And this one is written and directed by Ian Tuason, I believe is the pronunciation there. And I was really impressed by this just because of how low the budget was, and of course what it's going to do. It's going to make that back in the first weekend and then some, because we're talking about a movie that costs less than $1 million to make, and I think in the first weekend just in the domestic box office made over $9 million. So definitely very profitable. And you can see with minimal sets and stuff why they want Ian Tuason to direct the next Paranormal Activity movie. And he also showcases in this a little bit of theater of the mind is what I like to call it, I guess, because a lot of it you're just kind of creating inside your own mind, which is an interesting take, and it's a unique horror movie in a lot of ways, in my opinion. And I just love the way that he made this movie interesting. I know some people I've seen, don't necessarily feel that way, but to me, I was locked in despite the fact that it only takes place really in a couple different settings. Basically, you're upstairs in the bedroom of this house, and then you're downstairs at the kitchen table where she records her podcast. And that's really cool. Minimal sets and still able to keep you engaged, still able to deliver tense moments, which I thought was really cool. And I think, not giving anything away here, not getting the spoilers quite yet, but the way that they design the movie to be basically just her and then her podcast host, who we never see on screen, we only hear his voice, and they're going through these audio files that someone sends them an email with 10 different audio files. And to me, that kept me engaged because I wanted to see what the next file sounded like and what the next file sounded like, all the way until you get down to that 10th file, and they're kind of getting increasingly more creepy with each file. And so to me, that kept me engaged in this movie, kept me intrigued, and kept me wanting to see what we were building towards. You could probably describe this movie as a slow build, but I really enjoyed the journey to that destination personally. So some of my kind of initial overall thoughts there with this one. Don't go into it expecting a lot of jump scares or anything like that. Like I said, it's more ambiguous, more theater of the mind, more, they're having, her in like the far right side of the frame, and then, a dark hallway or a doorway or something kind of prevalent in the other side of the frame, taking up, a good majority of it, 2/3 of the frame. And you're kind of staring at that. Is there something in there? And, you don't know if there's anything in there or not. It just kind of you being allowed to kind of picture stuff inside your own mind. And then also sometimes maybe your mind's playing tricks on you. Maybe you do see something that's not there. Maybe they are throwing little things in there on the screen. And I just love that about this movie. So many different things to, pick apart about it. And it's one of those movies that will have you looking up theories at the end of it. You'll be looking up those ending explained videos. And there's a lot of different ways you can interpret this movie. And I've let it sit for a couple days before I came with the full review, because the more I think about it, the more I like it. And I think it's one of those type of movies for me. And I'm anxious to watch it a second time, probably once it comes out on Blu-ray or whatever. But definitely I enjoyed this one. And I would recommend, as I mentioned in my out of theater reaction, that if you're interested in this one, definitely go see it in theaters, because it's all about sound. You want that good sound quality, unless you got like a good surround sound system at home. Definitely go see this one in theaters if you're interested. But let's get into the plot. Let's talk some spoilers for Undertone. Spoiler warning. All right, so this one starts with a cold open of, a woman singing a lullaby to an older lady in bed, which we would find out is her mother. That's our main character in this movie, Evie. She's singing Bye Bye Black Sheep, which definitely plays a part in the movie as we go forward. Her mother is basically on her deathbed there. I thought that it was at a hospital originally when I first saw it, and then realized later on, oh no, that's upstairs in the same house that she's recording this podcast in, which the podcast is kind of the backdrop of the whole movie, kind of where you get into everything. Kind of your entry point is that she hosts a paranormal podcast with her co-host Justin, who we only hear, his voice, when they're on the call together recording the podcast. And of course, it's called the Undertone podcast, fittingly enough. And she is a skeptic. They do a paranormal show, but she doesn't ever believe the paranormal stories. She's the non-believer, Justin's the believer. They kind of have that dynamic on the podcast, which obviously, kind of sets up the fact, oh, something's probably going to happen to her to where she's going to become less of a skeptic as this movie goes on. And I think they do a good job of establishing that. And as I said earlier, the kind of plot point that drives this movie is someone sending them a cryptic email that contains 10 different audio recordings, and they kind of listen to each one, throughout a couple different 2 or 3 different podcast recording sessions. So the first one, they kind of hear London Bridge in reverse on one of them, and they start to look up hidden messages in other children's songs, including Ba Ba Black Sheep, of course. As Evie mentions, her mother used to sing that to her when she was a little kid, and we see her singing it to her mom at the beginning of this movie, and find out some creepy stuff about all these different children's lullabies, which I think is pretty crazy, especially like when you play them in reverse. But Evie then, starts to feel kind of antsy after Blah Blah Black Sheep is brought up, and she hears, some creepy stuff going on in it. So she requests they stop recording the podcast for the night, but asks, her co-host to email her that Blah Blah Black Sheep recording, and she's going to analyze it further. From there, we go to kind of the next morning, and Evie gets a call from her boyfriend who is inviting her to a party at their house. So we realize, she doesn't typically live with her mom. She's staying with her while her mom's, on her deathbed, for lack of a better term there. And she agrees to attend. He kind of convinces her, saying that she could probably use it. And I'm expecting to see her go to this party, and we don't. And we kind of just flash forward to later that night, or the next morning, I guess, when she returns back home. And so I'm like, oh, our setting's literally just inside this house, which I thought was really cool. And like I mentioned earlier, pretty awesome writing and stuff to be able to keep you entertained with basically just 2 different set pieces: the upstairs of this house with, the bedroom and the hallway, and then downstairs with mainly just that dining room where she records the podcast. But when she returns home, she finds her mom somehow now laying in the floor beside the bed and not in the bed. So she has to put her back in the bed, which is really surprising because her mom is basically in this comatose state throughout this entire movie. So that was kind of creepy right there, just in and of itself. Like, how did she get on the floor? What's going on there with that situation? You start to ask questions already at that moment. And then we go to Evie listening to that Ba Ba Black Sheep recording and studying it. Like we talked about, her asking Justin to send it to her, and she wanted to study more about it. And while she's doing that, she receives a call from her doctor alerting her that she is indeed 6 weeks pregnant, as we'd seen her get, morning sick earlier in the film. And that leads to kind of the discovery that she is indeed pregnant. And so later that day, she's washing dishes downstairs in the kitchen room, which is attached to that dining room where she records her podcast. And she starts to hear water coming from upstairs, which is weird because, like I said, her mom's in that comatose state, can't really leave the bed. She goes up there and finds the bathroom faucet somehow running and is turned on. So that's kind of eerie at that point. You're like, well, her mom definitely didn't get out of bed. We've seen her down here this whole time. How did that come on? And what I love about this is all of this comes into play later in the recordings that they're listening to as well, as we'll get to momentarily, which it's almost like a time loop type trippy thing here that we're called in, or we come to find out that we're called in here with this movie, which just kind of goes to play into all the different theories, all the different ways that you can take this movie as well. So later that night, we see her avoiding her boyfriend's calls, probably not wanting to tell him that she's pregnant. And then we also see her make, which at the time I thought was a really weird choice, but definitely plays into kind of the theme of this movie and the subject matter, so to speak, as she then goes into the cabinet there beside the table she records her podcast at, gets a liquor bottle out, pours a glass, and starts drinking. And I'm like, well, I guess clearly she doesn't want this baby if she's going to go ahead and start drinking, knowing that she's 6 weeks pregnant. But also, once I get through this movie later on, I'm like, maybe that was kind of a subconscious thing. I don't know, but it's definitely interesting when you see it happen and leaves you perplexed a little bit at that point. But she gets back on the podcast and asks, her co-host asks her, you're not drinking again, are you? So I think kind of signifying that she's had a problem with alcohol in the past. So, we have that little tidbit, and they throw in little bits of dialogue, little bits of exposition like that to kind of give us a little bit more backstory into this Evie character, which I think is a nice touch and a nice way to do that. We find out once they start recording again that in one of the audio files, the faucet cuts on by itself is what, is mirroring what happened to Evie, as we talked about earlier. And that's not the first and only time that happens here with these podcast recordings. And at that point, you're just like, what the hell is going on? This is crazy. It's, it's what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like I said, kind of that time loop type theory here. So they go on to play the next recording file from there. And basically what you're getting into on these different audio recordings is there's a wife and a husband, Mike and Jessa, I believe are their names. And Jessa's more or less being haunted, and the husband kind of feels that because she's talking in her sleep, she's sleepwalking, she's doing some weird things, and that's why he's recording her. And each recording, kind of is a moment between that husband and wife. So on this next recording, we hear the wife saying something weird, and Justin kind of isolates the audio, turns it up, plays it in reverse, and comes to find out that what she's saying is come in Abazu, which he researches and finds out that Abazu in legend is known as the taker of children, which is creepy enough right there, especially when we already know at this point that Evie's pregnant now also. And so you're like, where is this going? This is going to get freaking weird. And it definitely does. As from there, we hear the wife on that recording when she wakes up and the husband tells her, hey, you were, saying some weird stuff in your sleep and almost sound like you were speaking backwards. And she doesn't remember any of this, which leads, Justin to tell Evie, the two podcast hosts, that, speaking in reverse and memory loss, two things that this lady on the recording is experiencing, are signs of possession, which of course, Evie being the skeptic doesn't believe in. So they go on through these recordings, kind of getting progressively creepier between this husband and wife. And when they reach recording number 8, it features, guess what? The Ba Ba Black Sheep song, which strangely enough is the exact same version that we heard earlier in the film when, Evie and Justin looked it up and Evie was researching it. And that, is very eerie. And Justin even starts to feel a little bit, concerned about it. But Evie just kind of tries to brush it off and explain it away as a coincidence. But at this point, her co-host Justin is pretty freaked out by the time they get to this 8th recording, and he doesn't even want to, finish the final 2 recordings. He says, hey, let's not listen to the last 2. We'll just trash the episode. But Evie disagrees and says, no, we've got to finish it. Here's what we'll do. We'll publish it as a 2-part episode, edit this one, put it out, and then we'll listen to the other 2 on the next recording and put it out the following week. So that's kind of the plan from there. Later that night, we see Evie attempting to go to bed, and she throws in some earbuds to listen to a guided sleep meditation because she's been having trouble sleeping. But this is one of the more creepy moments of the movie, especially, thus far, as she's listening to this guided meditation, and it just gets super eerie, super weird, because it's talking about like you're in front of a river, you're in a babbling brook, and then all of a sudden it talks about like a child floating in the river, and then it starts turning to talking about choking children and such. And of course she awakens, and you're left to wonder, was she sleeping and playing that in her own head throughout a dream? Did this recording really do it? Is it, a possession thing with her? And all of that's left kind of ambiguous, which I like. I like the ambiguous aspects of this movie. Some people may hate it, but to me, I'm always a sucker for that ambiguous kind of stuff personally. But to just add to that creepy moment, when Evie wakes up, then she thinks she hears her mom praying from the other room, and so she goes there to check. And we even hear it in the audio of the film, and there's multiple different moments that stuff's kind of light, but you can hear it, and that's definitely one you hear, is her mom saying these prayers, or someone saying these prayers, because when she goes to check on her mom, she's still laying there in bed, hasn't moved, and she's in her comatose state. And I love the fact that this movie does this thing where every time she goes and checks on her mom, the camera kind of zooms in on her mom, like close to the face, and we're almost just waiting on, her eyes to pop open, or she to, awake and do something, suddenly. And we don't really ever get that moment, but you also kind of feel like, okay, this is building to something that's going to happen with her mom. And I think eventually we get there, and we get there in a good way, in my opinion. So from there, we get back to them recording the podcast, and they only have the 2 audio files left, the 9th and the 10th. And the 9th audio recording they listen to features the wife on the recording saying that, she woke up in the middle of the night and the husband wasn't there, but there was a black shadow beside her, and she began to pray, and that the shadow began to pray along with her. So yet again, kind of mirroring what's happening to Evie here with her hearing prayers as well. We just, heard her do that with her mom, the night previously. A caller then calls into their podcast after that, because when Justin produced that first episode with the 8 recordings, he told people, the time they'd be recording the next episode and invited them to call in live on the show. Someone does and informs them that the 2 people on the recording, Mike and Jessa, lived near him, and they live in the same town as Evie, which is super creepy at that point. You're like, whoa, what is going on here? And so not only does this caller claim to know them, but they were from the same town that Evie lives in. And he goes on to explain that they were found dead in their house with bags over their head at the bottom of their stairs with pictures of babies drawn all over the walls. Then another caller calls in and tells of a lady that killed her own baby that would play children's songs backwards, which Evie laughs at and doesn't believe because she kind of chalks it up to people just wanting to hear themselves on the podcast and making stuff up in order to do that. And then there's a third caller that talks about an old lady that was possessed and was giving away these ceramic figures to people, these ceramic religious figures. And throughout the movie, we've seen Evie's mom have a bunch of those ceramic religious type of figures, and the camera kind of focused on one multiple times. And so I think at that point, we're kind of led to believe that maybe something attached itself to these figures because that lady was allegedly possessed. And then, of course, Evie's mom bought it just thinking it was, a religious figure like she collects. And maybe she brought something into the home that's now, affecting Evie, and all of this madness has ensued. It's another theory, another way to look at this movie. Like I said, multiple different ways that you can interpret this thing, which I think is really cool. But from there, we finally get to that 10th recording, and this is where things get ratcheted up. I think from this 10th recording on, the last, 5, 10, 15 minutes of this movie, the build up, the slow build, it definitely pays off in a major way. This shit has nuts in it. It gets cuckoo banana nuts here in the last few minutes. So the 10th recording features more backwards, blah, blah, black sheep. And then what's crazy is you hear someone on the recording, what you think it's the wife, obviously, because that's all that's been on this recording is that husband and wife. But they say the co-host's name. You hear him say Justin's name. You hear him say, "I'm so cold, Justin," or something like that, right? And then another caller calls in at that point and asks to speak to Mary, which is super eerie because Evie, kind of speaking to her mom in her comatose state, told her, earlier in the film, "Your little girl's pregnant, and I think I'm going to name the baby Mary." And this caller calls in and continues to ask, "Can I speak to Mary? Can I speak to Mary?" over and over here on this recording. And then another caller calls in and says, "You shouldn't have called out to Abazu by listening to the 10th recording." And so these calls just continue to ratchet things up, ratchet up the creepiness. And then there's another caller. And when this caller calls in, we start to focus on Evie. And this caller, her name is Abby, and she starts saying she's not good enough. She's not good enough. And you can hear a baby crying. You can hear a bag crinkling as well. And we start to feel like, oh, is she about to do something to this baby? Is she about to do something to herself live on this call? And then we get kind of this Evie breakthrough moment where she starts to confess some things to this caller. She says, "I killed my mom." And we're like, wait, what? And she says that she killed her mom, basically going on to explain that she feels like her mom is in this comatose state and, on the edge of dying because her mom had asked her to pray with her every night and she didn't hold up that end of the bargain. And so she thinks that that's why she went into this comatose state and now is on the verge of dying. So she's claiming that she killed her mom. And then that caller, Abby, on the phone starts to laugh. And, it's like a creepy, maniacal laughter. And then you start to hear this evil voice, this demonic type voice come in saying, "It's too late." And then a plastic bag can be heard rattling, and then lights begin to flicker everywhere in the house that Evie's in. You hear those creepy demonic voices again, this time inside the house. Baba Black Sheep somehow is playing inside the house as well. Her saying, she killed her mother can be heard in the house as well. That, what she just said to the caller. And then the lady asking to speak to Mary. All of these things just start to play over and over, and just like an overload on your senses, an overload on your hearing. Like, it's insane the way that this thing starts to attack you at that point. And then you hear the TV pop on, and there's this scary image from this viral video that her and her podcast host had talked about at the beginning of the movie. And that image is up on screen with just the lady with the creepy smile. She can't get it to turn off on her TV. Justin starts to, hear Evie freaking out, tells her to get out of the house. And then she begins to hear the same thing the wife said in one of the earlier recordings, which is that "come in Abazu" voice. It just continues to come in with this demonic tone over and over inside of her house. Just super creepy stuff there. And then Evie is standing at the bottom of her stairs, just like we heard about the Mike and Jessica characters being found at the bottom of their stairs. And a light kind of shines up the stairs, and we see on the walls just all kinds of drawings. Looks like pictures of babies, just like they talked about earlier in the film, just covering the walls leading up the stairs. Evie goes up the stairs, enters her mom's bedroom, and this is where we get that payoff of her mom's not in the bed anymore. And on the bed, though, is that ceramic figure that I talked about earlier that one caller alleged, a possessed lady was handing out to people. There's one on the bed, and all we see is kind of in the distance. And this is kind of the payoff as well of all those different shots of kind of dark hallways and stuff taking up the frame and us wondering if there's something going to be in there. We see her mother standing up in the bathroom, in a faraway shot. And then we see her kind of start to walk backwards, it looks like. And then at that point, the screen goes black and we hear the lights all shut off. And then the final, 60 seconds to 3 minutes of this movie takes place in just complete blackness, and all you hear is the sounds. And I love this aspect. I think that this is the part that some people hated, some people had mixed feelings about, because you're just kind of left to wonder, well, what happened? But I think that that's kind of what's really cool about this movie, right? Because it's a movie that's more about what you hear versus what you see. And to end it in complete darkness and you just hear all these different sounds, including Evie saying, "Something is wrong, Justin, I'm so cold," which we heard on that 10th audio recording earlier. So you're like, wait a minute, are these files coming from Evie? Like, is this like a time loop thing? You don't really know. And then you hear that creepy voice come in again, "Come in, Abazu," playing in reverse with the demonic voice. And that just plays over and over and over. And the assault on your senses continues. And then the film just abruptly ends as what sounds like maybe Evie, maybe her mom falling down the stairs. And then it's just total silence, complete blackness on the screen, and the credits roll. And I mean, inside the theater, what's crazy is everyone just kind of sits there, doesn't move, and you could like hear a pin drop inside the theater. And I even sat there for a few minutes as well, just thinking like, damn, what an ending. Like what happened? And it is one that, you can interpret your own ways. You can go watch ending explained videos, try and get all these different theories, some of which I like more than others. But I absolutely love the fact that it ends with just an absolute assault on your ears of all these different sounds that you've heard throughout the movie, all these different creepy demonic tones, and you're left to wonder, what the hell was that? I don't know. I loved it, man. I loved the way that they ended that kind of ambiguously. I understand some people may not, and that may have been what kind of turned you away from the movie. I had mixed feelings about it initially, just because I was like, man, that was so abrupt and I wanted more. But then the more I thought about it, the more it grew on me. The more stuff I looked up about it, the more it grew on me. And then as I allowed it to sit for a couple days before I came here for the full review, it really grew on me as well. So I think all in all, for me, I really enjoyed Undertone. Probably one of my favorite horror movies thus far of this year. And as far as my rating is concerned for this one, I'm going to go with an 8 out of 10. And I can't wait to watch this one again just to see if it hits me in a different way, or if I pick up on different stuff throughout the movie now that I know kind of what it leads to. But I love the slow build and the way that the recordings kind of gradually just lock you into the movie more until you wonder, all right, what's going to happen when they get to this 10th recording? And I think the payoff works for me when they get to that 10th recording, and then it's just this complete assault on your senses for the last 10, 15 minutes of the movie. I think maybe if you're a person that's all about, the ending, you're about the destination more than the journey, maybe you won't feel the same way, but I'm always more of a journey than destination type person. So I absolutely loved it. And I thought that the recordings, listen to them piece by piece, were a great way to keep me engaged. And that last 10 or 15 minutes for me was so awesome. And when I left the theater, I don't know, this one just kind of sticks with you in a weird way. That's what I felt like when I left the theater on this one. It's definitely different. It's a very unique horror movie, but I really enjoyed it. So that's why I give it an 8 out of 10. That's my rating, and that's my spoiler review here for Undertone. Like I said, there's a lot of different theories about what was going on in this movie. I won't touch on them all. I'll allow you to kind of look those up for yourself, but I really like the kind of time loop theory where, this was maybe Evie's files, and then it's kind of this weird time loop thing. I like that a lot. I also definitely could see the possession angle. That's definitely present here in this film. That's what I love about it, though. Multiple different ways you can analyze this, and multiple different ways and different things you can take away from it. So that's kind of my thoughts on Undertone. Like I said, 8 out of 10 for me. Let me know your rating. Let me know how you felt about the film down in the comments. Maybe you felt the complete opposite, and that's fine too. As I always say, movies are subjective, and I respect your opinion no matter what it is. But let me know about it down in the comments. Always enjoy chatting movies with you guys, and those interactions help me as I continue to grow the JC's Movies channel here on YouTube. Having said that, I appreciate you tuning into this one, and I will catch you on the next one.